and howl about America and democracy. There is no America. There is no democracy. We no longer live in a world of nations and ideologies. The world is a college of corporations, inexorably determined by the immutable bylaws of business. The world is a business. And I have chosen you to preach this evangel.
For all my free market healthcare robbing, stock stealing, retirement fund fucking with niggas. Fuck you little credit card scamming, jewelry stealing, crack selling, liquor store robbing motherfuckers. Shout to the homies, Carnegie, OG, Willie Randolph Hearst, Baruch, Rockefeller, the real Rockefeller, my main bitch Leona, pour out a little Louis XIII, Scott Rothstein, Jack Abramoff, hold your head, my roll top niggas, let's get this money. I spend my day pimping America overseas, pension for the workers, nigga please, embezzlement, etiquette, private settlement, I'm better with Confederate rhetoric from my mansion in Connecticut, foreclosure Vic homes at the tenement, I twist words like a speech impediment, I hope you got good credit bitch, if not better get a new job with benefits, while I play golf with niggas and get cheddar with, new money buys brand new carrots, my old money bunch of great grandparents, you got grills in your mouth, I ain't mad at ya, I own every gold mine in South Africa. Thanks, baby, you made me $1 billion. Plus, I own a building, but each one of my children's children.
And it's that time of the week again. It is Voice of Rebellion Radio. I am back after 2 weeks. Yep, I did not air last week a live show. We just repeated what was a very good show from the week prior to that. But I am back. This is your host, Chris J. As always, here at Voice of Rebellion Radio at the one and only UCY TV. We are talking about I'm just going to put a interesting inquiry to start the show. And that is, how is it that all around the world, it seems like in many different countries, we have this Arab Spring, and South America with the Brazil, what happened there, and Zimbabwe recently. How is it that all these spontaneous protests and then / revolutions happen in favor of the United States, the West, and Zionism, when these three entities around the world, especially the United States and Israel, are so vastly unpopular around the general consensus around the world? The United States is almost at this point stereotypically hated around the world in many different countries. Not the people necessarily, but the government has become a nemesis to the people of the third world and a nemesis to the rest of the world in general, and only a few countries have a positive view, where the average person has a positive view of this government. The Zionists are probably by about 2/3 of this world seen about as sneaky, seen about as crooked, and many, many governments don't even recognize the Israeli government and the Israeli state as being legitimate. Many, many, many peoples around the world do not see the Israeli state as being legitimate, and many people inside the United States even are starting to see the Israeli state to be illegitimate. So how are these revolutions, these protests happening that are in favor of these things? For example, Arab Spring, to depose Assad in 2011 started, and then the revolution started, was Gaddafi with the Libyan rebels, or in Egypt to bring about Mohamed Morsi to power, who was later deposed. How did these protests happen? Supposedly out of completely grassroots movements, is what they would like us to believe. Out of completely unknown origination, it seems like. It all of a sudden just happens, or, they say a Facebook post sparks it, a Facebook group, this was all organized. That was at least what they like to tell us was the Egyptian revolution of 2011. Completely out of nowhere. That's what seems to be almost seems to be the general consensus of how these things originated. Now, I think there's a little bit more to that, and I think England that thinks critically about these protests and revolutions that have happened in these countries would probably agree as well. There is no there seems to be very little support at this point, especially in certain countries where it seems like these countries had the lowest, possibly some of these countries might have the lowest opinion of the United States government, the Yankees, all that stuff. And it happens in these countries. It'd be a little bit understandable maybe if it was to happen in a country like the UK or France or whatever, a government that's not friendly with the United States takes power. Like maybe when Jacques Chirac was the president, a major protest happens in counter of the Chirac government for not wanting to go in Iraq. That would seem a little bit more believable because there is that support for the United States government and the United States as a whole in these countries in West Europe. But when it happens in a country like Venezuela or Brazil or Zimbabwe, that's when it starts to seem a little bit weird. Because that these countries, the popular opinion of the United States government is overwhelming. You're talking about 70% are against it. Now, a lot of people get used as useful idiots in these movements and stuff like that, like what has happened with the Capriles and Leopoldo Lopez, the whole right-wing opposition inside of Venezuela, where many of them are uneducated country farmers and stuff like that have been indoctrinated into supporting the Venezuelan opposition, not knowing that it's foreign backers, not knowing who's truly behind it, not knowing the true intentions. When they catch them with catchy slogans and I think it was Necesitamos Cambio, I believe is we need change. It's almost like the Obama saying of hope and change and all that. All these very basic slogans that prey on the most weak-minded or the most uneducated of the population. And that's what Capriles and that's what Leopoldo Lopez and the right-wing opposition is doing and garnering a lot of support from that. So, yeah, they say that, and it might be true that near half of Venezuela does support the opposition. But also, a lot of Venezuela are completely, I would say, out of educated Venezuela that has seen actually gone through high school. I'm not even talking about university graduates and stuff like that. In Venezuela, and also, if you look at especially if you were to cut it down to educated middle and lower class of Venezuela, I would say that the support for the Venezuelan government is probably somewhere between 60 to 70%. They might not be 100% support of Maduro, but they are definitely not in support of recalling Maduro. There's a major difference between, yes, the general opinion of the Venezuelan people, I would say it's true that he is probably no higher than 40% actually do support Maduro in its fullest, because they see him to be somewhat inept and not exactly they see him to be a little bit weak as a leader, but does not mean that they want to go back to how it was in the 90s by initiating possibly what the right wing wants to do in Venezuela, which is recall Maduro, and after that, I'm guessing they're going to try to recall the vice president or force a new election. Is actually they want to recall him in a very quick manner, where no one even sees that it happens, by recalling him prior to the end of the year, which is this is only a few months, and the people have very little say, but the people in the National Assembly of Venezuela, the MUD lawmakers inside the National Assembly of Venezuela want to recall Maduro rapidly. So next year, there'll be a snap election, and it'll be a quick election will happen, and that way they could possibly bring their guy in with that election, especially if they can fraud their way in and do maneuvers like what they did to take the supermajority of the National Assembly last December, where they took 3 seats that were with people that were barred from even running in the first place. but they still got in somehow. Now, if this is as much of a dictatorship as people say that the PSUV has total control of the politics and that they completely control everything inside of Venezuela, and that it's a socialist dictatorship. If it's truly a dictatorship, when those barred people never even had a way to get in, it definitely shows that there's a actual struggle going on, and who is behind that struggle and who's trying to grab the power in that country. And that is the people that are trying to grab the power inside of Venezuela. There's a few countries that come to mind, and this is just an example, and this is a current example of a protest that's supposedly spontaneous grassroots protests that have no foreign backing whatsoever. Supposedly, is what they're trying to say, or that might have foreign backing, but they're not getting money. They're not getting potentially even, military training. Maybe, I guess you could. There's definitely this is turned into practically a band of almost like a paramilitary, a paid military of some sort. Some of these people in the right wing opposition inside of Venezuela, but if you look closely, the obvious answer is that the United States and Israel are backing it, because for years they have been a challenge to their control of the region, and just been it's one country that's not controlled by the Rothschilds. Venezuela is not controlled by the Rothschilds, so that does irk the United States in the Israeli government, and their bank is not controlled by the Rothschilds. They have their gold, even though I saw that that's currently being contested. That at this point they're trying to push them to the point where they sell everything, and then at one point if they sell their central bank, that'd be the end game. But however, this government won't do that, so they're just going to have to wait till they're just going to bring in a government that will allow for the private interest to come in, which would be Capriles, would probably be the president that would do that. And you have the Capriles Alup Lopez crime syndicate that is pretty much 100% backed by the United States, 100% backed by Israel. Notice the Venezuelan opposition has never said one bad word about Israel, and you think that when that came up, all that stuff, all the rhetoric that came up about the Venezuelan, when the Venezuelan government was condemning Israel, maybe they would say something about Israel, and maybe they would agree on that part. But no, from what I've seen, they're 100% pro-Israel. Capriles, Enrique Radonsky Capriles, and then Leopoldo Lopez is currently in jail serving his sentence for fueling the conditions that led to the pretty much almost just short of I guess they're going to say they incited the actions that led to 43 Venezuelans dead, and then there's all these people that are crying on the internet, crying over here, the right-wing Latin community of the United States, crying about how you got unfairly sentenced, for inciting, and it was clearly, you see what happens is that, like what happened in 2002, is that they start shooting first, then the Chavistas who have their own guns start shooting back, and then their media blacks out the part where they shot first, and they just shows them shooting back to make it seem like the other side shot first. And then they even sometimes shoot their own people, as we'll see in 2014, and then they blame the government for doing it, and then turn these people into martyrs by killing them, their own side killing each other. And it was said that Leopoldo Lopez could have been the next one who would have been the big martyr and the big rallying cry for the right-wing community inside of Venezuela. But he ended up going to jail first, which actually his wife on CNN said that she thanked the Maduro for putting him in jail because he would have been killed otherwise. Because that was he would just been confused one more step along the ploy, and that's a false flag, isn't it? Right there, if you kill somebody and then you justify, and then that possibly if Leopoldo Lopez was killed by his own people, and then they blamed it on the socialist government inside of Venezuela. You could imagine that the United States the next day would be already talking about special ops forces going there, or possibly even an invasion. I haven't even ruled it out completely. I still think there's like about 5% chance that one day the United States will enter Venezuela, at least as a small limited force, because they have the base right there in Colombia. This is a short hop over, across that border, and they're going to try to interfere and try to take out the major challenge on this side of the hemisphere. As I think part of the reason why they've been so obsessed with the sanctions and the labeling a national security threat and stuff like that is because Venezuela is like Cuba on this side, much closer to the United States than, for example, Iran, Syria, North Korea, now Yemen, and so on and so on. And Venezuela also is a country that has more oil than Saudi Arabia, so of course there's those interests by all those oil companies that don't have a piece of the pie there because the oil is nationalized. It actually was for a while being sold much lower than market, or was maybe much lower than the rest of the countries were selling it. They were selling at $50 a barrel. Now Saudi Arabia has artificially dropped the price down to talk about $30 a barrel and stuff like that, in order to try to bring Venezuela down to a point where they would be near bankruptcy. But it's actually backfiring on Saudi Arabia because I saw that they're tapping into their foreign reserves as of now, which could be this could lead to more economic problems inside of Saudi Arabia. But ultimately, the royal family does have $1.3 trillion inside of Saudi Arabia, so I think that's what they're counting on, is their huge backup fortune that they can rely on. But Saudi Arabia has less oil than Venezuela. Venezuela does have a very large oil reserve, so they do have more of the supply, but they don't have quite the money stored up like the Saudi royal family, $1.3 trillion that they're sitting on. And the Saudis want to win the economic warfare there because the Saudis are a major supplier to some of the same markets. I think Venezuela supplied for a while West Europe at times, and they definitely supply a lot of people over here in the Americas. And even some of the oil here in the United States was being sold by Venezuela to Citgo, which Citgo wasn't brought about during the Chavista years. Citgo goes back. They used to be sold. It was Venezuelan oil, but they was back during the Andres Perez era. Citgo was here, and Andres Perez is the former Venezuelan dictator. That is a name that very few people that talk about Venezuela even know. Andres Perez, who was the former right-wing dictator, fascist dictator of the country, backed by the United States and Israel for years and years, and then really backed by the United States. And he went along with all the World Bank, your IMF, all those economic things, World Economic Organizations, their plans for Venezuela. He went along with it, and it led to a lot of Venezuelans going into very bad poverty by the 90s when he left. And he actually was put to jail. He was actually sentenced for corruption by the help of one of Chavez's former vice presidents, Rangel, who was a long-time activist, going back to the 50s, 60s. I mean, this is a guy that also ran against Andres Perez as like a third party. There was COPAI and Acción Democrática, were the two parties that were pretty much like the same, that ran against each other for many years, and he was from like a third party that ultimately only got like 6% of the vote or something like that. But he still made a stand in the 80s, and Rangel eventually got to all the way to vice president. Now he's about 80-something years old. So if you wouldn't be a candidate, if you're thinking about candidates for 2018, I think that Venezuela, that's a major thing that they're coming about, is that the replacement of Maduro, because Maduro can't stay around into the 2020s, and it's going to be definitely a changing world when it comes to that. I think the U.S. is going to get a lot more. You think the U.S. is aggressive on foreign policy now. You're already seeing it. You're seeing them open that door, open the Pandora's box to a very, very aggressive foreign policy that is going to be hell for third world countries. I don't think they're going to hold back anymore when it comes to countries like Iran, Venezuela. There's not going to be much more rhetoric anymore. When Hillary's president, she already pledged to bomb Iran. She's laughed about bombing Iran. We have practically and she doesn't have any real power anyways, but it's what this is symbolic of, is that the bankers are putting this person that is a direct friend of the Rothschilds, some people say a lover of one of the female Rothschilds. She is and it has characteristics of a complete psychopath and is in failing health, by some people say, which is a complete disaster because it's showing to the world how little the United States cares at this point. I think that the United States will be very aggressive in the next 10 years or so, and I think that Maduro won't cut it in Venezuela, as they need a Chavez-like character. Maduro has a quite different personality from Chavez. It's Chavez, but his charisma is not quite there. They need somebody like Diosdado Cabellos, who was the former vice president, who was a long time considered the front runner if Chavez ever needed to be succeeded. Or they need to go with Aristobolo. I think is also a good character just because he has more experience, I believe, and just a fresh face, because Maduro has gotten a bad name because he's been associated with the tough times caused by a lot of outside conditions, as well a little bit with his own inexperience. He was only the vice president literally like 85 days or something like that prior to the time he was announced to be the presumptive successor to Chavez. Remember, Chavez ran, at the beginning of his campaign, ran as a healthy, he was cleared of cancer at that time, ran as a healthy candidate, and won the election in October 2012, but things really changed very quickly, as he was in November, I believe, or December, he said in his last ever televised address to his people on December 8th, 2012, he announced that he had cancer again, and then said that Maduro should, if he ever was to fall out of the presidency for whatever reason, Maduro would be his successor, and that the people should vote for Maduro. Of course, if it was vote for Maduro, support Maduro, the Constitution, because it was the first year of his in the new term. That's why the election was held in 2013. For example, if that would have happened in 2014, they would have not had an election and just went to like the United States has, where it goes to the vice president. But they had an election because of the first year of the term. And Chavez, only a few months later, we're literally less than 3 months later, was dead. And Maduro ran against Capriles in April 2013, and now he's been the president since. So now we're talking about 3.5 years or so. Well, some pretty rough times. Now, some of it's been hyper-sensationalized by the media over here in the United States, and by people like Univision and stuff like that. But the truth is that yes, there's some shortages in some places, but they make it seem like their only government stores exist. The government runs all the grocery stores. There's government and private grocery stores. In fact, the majority of the stores are private stores where you just shop, like, if you go to Publix or whatever, it's just a store like that. You go in, there's no special anything, you just go and get your groceries. There's really nothing. There's nothing to it. And then there's the government stores, which is for so the poor Venezuelans have somewhere to get food. You get basic food stuff and stuff like that. They're down. Stuff's way cheaper than your Publix or whatever. It's with the subsidized food, people, instead of paying $5 for a meal, you pay 50 cents for a meal, whatever. But they're probably more like, instead of $2, it's 20 cents. And for many years, there was no regulations on it. It just, you shopped it there like a regular grocery store, allowing for foreigners and stuff like that to take advantage, especially Colombians that went across the border, picked up literally stuff like people talk about the people smuggling milk and stuff like that. That's a lot of times where Colombians go into the Venezuela and bring them back to Colombia, where prices are much closer to American prices, and selling it at near American prices for a profit of 8 times, 9 times, even 10 times what they bought it for in Venezuela. So when you're making 8 times what you bought it for in Venezuela, definitely very lucrative, and a lot of people are involved in it, causing partially was part of the reason for the shortages. So the border was shut down. Also, paramilitary, they were fearing were crossing over the border, which is Colombia swamped this paramilitary. The whole region has had an economic problem with, for example, Colombia, which is the flip side, is a what quote unquote capitalist country, even though it's not capitalist. If you know the meaning of capitalist, it's more corporatist country is a better way to describe Colombia. Capitalist countries don't even really exist. It's more like corporatist. Like for example, a lot of people say the United States is capitalist. It's more, I should say, corporatist, because capitalism would imply no government restrictions whatsoever, and a market that just anything goes, pretty much. But corporatism involves government and the corporations colluding together, which is more like what happens, and it squashes competitors, which is how Colombia works as well. So that kind of economy, so it's a different kind of economy, and it's also a United States ally versus a non-United States ally. So it's two countries are quite different, and they're both suffering, and I think Colombia's suffering worse. Right now, Colombia, with food prices having went up 8 times recently, hyperinflation, and many things being sold off. Right now, I think what's exacerbating the problem is possibly the fact that there's this increased privatization, and it's like what happened in Chile many years ago, when there's certain, definitely nothing wrong with stuff being private, of course not, but when there's certain stuff that when it gets privatized, it leads to a lot of suffering for the working and middle class, and that's what happened in Chile during the 70s, 80s, 90s. After Augustus Pinochet took power after the military coup, and he privatized everything. And the poverty went through the roof for the next few years. And also and then people, I hate it. I fucking hate it when people that claim to be pro-liberty, they talk about helicopter rides and laugh about the Pinochet murdering era and how they would love to do the same thing to fucking statists. Say, yeah, I'd love to throw some fucking statists out of a helicopter. It's like, okay, you talk about how much you love your non-aggression principle. You talk about how much you love the free market. Pinochet worked with the big corporations. It was a corporatist country, number one. Number two, so there was definitely, if you were an independent small business, I don't think it would have been a fun time in Pinochet's Chile. And also, the guy fucking murdered 60,000 people, and he came about in a coup. A coup. There was nothing. He made a giant state around him, and anybody that talked out against his government and was actually any bit of a prominent activist got thrown in a black van and disappeared in the middle of the night. So is that what you're saying you want for the United States? Is that you want people to get thrown away in black vans in the middle of the night? Because that's where we're going. In fact, a lot of the stuff that's happening inside the United States nowadays, in the state of our country right now, and what we could be going to as we descend lower and lower in the first world status to where we become maybe eventually a third world country, is very reminiscent of Pinochet's Chile. In fact, also, even our population, in a way, is a little bit hauntingly, they even sort of look like us. Because a lot of Chileans, I believe, are light-skinned white people mixed in with a tanner skin, like our Hispanic population. It's a little bit different, but even the demographics are kind of similar. So there's a lot of things hauntingly similar between our descent into a military junta and Chile's descent, but it was a rapid descent caused by a man, Henry Kissinger, into the Pinochet's fascism, which a lot of academics deny that this guy, including, of course, Milton Friedman and stuff, they're going to say that he was a great example of a democratic capitalist leader or whatever. But the guy was just an outright fascist, just like Ferdinand Marcos or Francisco Franco of the time. Henry Kissinger directly brought about Pinochet to power and organized the coup against Salvador Allende in 1973. So you're going to tell me that you are on the side of liberty and you're on the side of you're on the side of the non-aggression principle, but you support a leader who was brought about by Henry Kissinger. He's about you talk about non-aggression. He's about the opposite of non-aggression principle. I mean, the dude fucking murdered 600,000 people inside of Vietnam and Southeast Asia. He's the one that escalated the Vietnam War big time as a diplomat inside the United States, and at the same time, he was the one that was supported sarin, or was ordered sarin gas to be dropped inside of Vietnam, and also ordered the bombings of heavily populated areas inside North Vietnam. Henry Kissinger. He's the one that was heavily behind the coup in Chile. Henry Kissinger is an absolutely disgusting, evil, immoral, unbelievably evil, unbelievably horrid and horrendous individual that somehow still alive. Dude's like 92 years old, looks like a fat pig, 400 pounds has got to be. I don't know. This guy is just really out of shit. But somehow he's still fucking alive. 92 years old. It really shows the elite have superior medicine than the rest of us, because these elites look like walking zombies, but they're still around. They just seem to get older and older and older, but they don't die. Rothschilds. You got David Rockefeller. He's 100 years old. David Rockefeller's 100 years old. If not 101. He's at least 100. He's at least 100. Kissinger's 92 years old. He's 90-something years old now. All of them. They got... And George H.W. Bush is in his 90s now. All these absolutely horrible, terrible individuals, and they're still around. Dick Cheney had 5 heart attacks, and one major thing, he doesn't even have a heart. That's right. He's got an artificial heart. The dude's not just metaphorically heartless. He's heartless. He's a heartless individual. All these elite scumbags still around, and it's like I really just hope it doesn't keep going. I'm going to be 30-something years old, and then they're going to be in their 100. They're going to be past 110 or some shit, and I'm going to be still talking about them. And just waiting for them to finally get their judgment, get their close to anything, any kind of consolation prize. At least knowing that in their afterlife, they're gonna suffer. Because I believe there's some kind of afterlife, and I know that those people are not getting the good version of an afterlife. That's for sure. These people, these elites, they might not have seen any kind of. They might not got. We might. I'm hoping that honestly, the whole New World Order, by I'm talking about like next 20 years, has crumbled apart finally, and that these people, at least just seeing them, even if they only spend a couple of years in jail before they come to their deaths that are well overdue, would still be a little bit of a consolation prize. I mean, I'm just talking about a tiny fragment, a little tiny piece of justice for what they've done in their long, evil, horrid lives that you're talking about. The Rothschilds, Jacob Rothschild. I saw Jacob Rothschild in that one video with Luke Rudkowski, where he's interviewing. Now, I'm not going to go into how somehow Luke Rudkowski ran into Jacob Rothschild on the streets of London. But, you could see the evilness in his eyes. The dude just seething. It's like there's a few people, there's not too many of them. But it's just like these very top officials. The Queen of England comes to mind, Netanyahu, Jacob Rothschild, George H.W. Bush, Dick Cheney, that you just look at them and you just see evil seething out of their eyes. It's really creepy. And Pope Benedict's another one. But I really see it with like Netanyahu and Jacob Rothschild. Really, I mean, and also how Netanyahu talks. I mean, does anybody else just get really thinks that his voice is just really, really creepy? I mean, it's not like it's so, I don't know what it is. Maybe because it is partially because it's so deep. You know, I can't even like do the impersonation, but it's just you could almost see him just going up there and being like, "Hello, mortals. I am I am the supreme leader." I can't do like a Netanyahu voice. Like he's that's not an impersonation I'm good at. I can't. It's hard to even joke. It's hard to even joke about him at times because he's so the fiery want to see that scumbag thrown in jail just so strong to me, and see Jacob Rothschild thrown in jail as well. Those two really deserve it. But just in the chat room to see what's going on here. You know, and I've seen also that the elite, they're all into, you know, I've seen one of the things that you'll talk about the health treatments. They get this kind of like blood flush, like their entire system gets flushed out or something like that. So that's probably part of the reason why these people are living so long. I mean, you know, that they're able to live 20 to 30 years past where they should be living. I mean, are you going to really tell me that David Rockefeller should be 100 years old? And you know, I don't know how true the rumor is that he's had 6 heart transplants, but it would not shock me at all. And that the fact that he was prioritized by everyone else, I mean, it's very hard for a regular person just to get 1 heart transplant or just to get 1 organ transplant, and this dude's gotten 6 heart transplants. I mean, it would not shock me at all if it was true, the rumor that David Rockefeller actually got 6 heart transplants. And also, let's see, I see Vince Easley was in the chat, so I'm just going to give a shout out to Vince Easley that he's actually here. And got the usual people here, John Titor. Nice to see, just nice to see after being 2 weeks off there, just seeing the same people back. Going back, I'm looking a little bit earlier into the chat room just to see what's going on. And Univision, I remember now, Univision is owned by Chaim Saban, which would explain why they have their incredible bias towards the incredible bias in favor of Capriles Radonsky, Capriles, whatever, and that the fact that they're also a big backer of Peña Nieto, who's been one of the few major Latin American presidents to not boycott Israel. But it's definitely changing because now Michael Temer is the president, and you know he's going to tie things up with Israel. He's definitely getting closer to Israel. Marcio Macri has Michael Temer was going to patch things up with Israel. You know, he's going to get closer to Israel. Marcio Macri has already patched things up with Israel. You know, that used to be Rousseff, who was was pretty hostile to Israel, and Christina Kirchner was, I would say, very hostile to Israel, because Israel really did not like her, and you know they blamed they were saying that her ties to Iran were somehow offending them or whatever, because they say that Iran had ties to this bombing back in '94, which, you know, I think that might have been one of their Mossad operations, was the bombing that happened against the Jewish synagogue in 1994, or the Jewish center back in 1994 in Argentina, because they're still using it this day as a propaganda piece to denounce Muslims in their country or denounce the Iranians in their country, which Christina Kirchner was developing good relations with Iran, and at the same time was announcing very strict citizenship measures against Iran. So I know that for sure that if you wanted to join the IDF, that would be, you would lose your citizenship, and I think if you even wanted an Israeli citizenship, you lost your citizenship instead of Argentina. So that means that she was doing very big steps against the dual citizenship inside of Israel. dual citizenship inside of Argentina against the Israelis' citizenship. Now, also, I know a lot of South America's boycott, or not just boycotted Israel, but also recognized Palestine as a legitimate country, which is a big step in the right direction. And I think 2/3 of the world or something like that does recognize Palestine, but a lot of countries recognize both. I think that honestly, to make some real progress, you can't recognize Israel and Palestine because you're trying to say the two-state solution is only a possible short-term temporary solution until Israel is eventually forced to cease to exist as a state. Because there's the only way in the future is a one Palestinian state, secular Palestinian state. I'm not calling for an Islamic state or anything like that inside of Palestine, or anything that puts Muslim as the official religion or puts Islam as the official religion inside of Palestine. But a secular state that accepts Jews, Arabs, anybody in their country, and a lot of the Israeli citizens could stay, I guess. But there's got to be some conditions that, I think that former IDF should be forced to leave in that circumstance. I'm sorry, but if you were actively participating in the murder of Palestinian people, why should Palestine let you stay in their state? You guys kicked all the Palestinians out and were planning to get rid of every last Palestinian. The fact that with my measures, what my recommendations would be to the Palestinian government when it came about on who gets to stay and who has to leave, that my recommendations even allow Israelis to stay, any of them to stay in the country after what they did to what the country as a whole did to Palestinians and were planning to force everyone to leave. They should take that as a definitely them not stooping to their level. I guess not even stooping to their level. I think they have a lot. I think a lot of people would agree that Israelis, just by what so many of them were involved with and their sick culture that they were indoctrinated into, that they might not be compatible to live with the Palestinians, and they should go. But and also I think that anything like that, like recent moves, people that recently moved to Israel, that were from Poland or from Georgia and stuff like that. By Georgia, I mean the country Georgia. People that their parents or whatever moved from that country, or they moved from that country, should have definitely anyone that moved to Israel and settled there because of their because they get privilege because they're Jewish, the son of Israel. After the Palestinian state's created, I think they should have to go home, and possibly even first generation people that were born in Israel and their parents. I think they should. I think they should go too. If their parents were there, only long term people that've been there for generations. Their family's been there for generations, and their family weren't directly involved with any kind of crimes in the occupied regions, such as where the army was at the settlements, or that their parents weren't involved with any major war crimes during any of the wars. I guess so. That we're starting to limit it some because it would be a very long and complex process, but it's anything that I say is not going to be is not even close to it's not even that extreme, and the level of extreme that the Israeli government has when it comes to what they consider the Palestinian people is to the same level of extreme that the Nazis had when it came to people that they didn't like across Europe. The Palestinians, according to the Israelis, a lot of them, a lot of Israeli lawmakers believe that the Palestinians should be deported / killed. I mean, you even have the Israeli officials saying stuff like that, to kill pregnant women and to kill children inside of Palestine. You have Israeli rabbis that is saying that, and these top Zionist rabbis saying horrible things like that. Stuff like missiles and relish tournament. We're going to level Gaza. We're going to level Palestine. I think that's the sentiment of that Zionist rabbis, and the fact that anybody like that, they're not going to get the leave. My recommendations would be any people that advocate genocide will get the harshest punishment possible and be sent to a work camp or something like that, and will go through a legal trial. I think it would be a very complex process just because of the amount of criminals involved with the IDF and such. That would definitely it would be much bigger than Nuremberg. And the amount of trials that would happen if the Zionist state was to finally cease to exist and the Palestinian state was created. Like I said, the Israelis do Mossad operations all around the world. And I think they're involved with the Argentinian Jewish Center bombing. And that's also all the way over in Argentina. Thousands of miles away from them. They had their pause on 9/11. They created the organization ISIS, helped create the organization ISIS along with the United States government, just like 9/11. They did it with the United States government, but they still were involved with it. It's no secret that I might be a little. People think that I'm definitely heavily biased, but I just use facts and I just use some just some empathy too to what the Palestinian people, to this horridness that they've had to live through the last 70-something years. So, it's like my statements might come a little bit extreme when I say it, but I want everybody to understand that what the extreme is just what the Israelis have made these Palestinians go through for the last 70. Now, we're getting close to 70 years. The King David Hotel bombing happened 70 years ago. If they just knew that little fact, that's one of the main things that led to the creation of Israel, was the King David Hotel bombing, which pretty much cemented, it told the British, for one, that they're not playing games, that they are going to want their land immediately, pretty much, because the British pretty much took their land for reserve and was about to give it to the Zionists, the people, the colonial project heads. That's pretty much the British, after World War I, took it from the Ottoman Empire. Which the Ottoman Empire, that Zionists tried to reason, I guess you could say, reason with money, or you could say bribe would be a better word. They probably said, we were just trying to reason with them. We're trying to reason their pockets a little bit, and made the greedy side of their brain could reason with us. But the Sultan said, hell no. We're not going to. You can give me $150 trillion. I'm not taking it. And it was $150 million. The Sultan said no in 1905, and then it doesn't seem too coincidental that the Ottoman Empire collapsed just a few years later. They had the Don May was a big part of the collapse, which the Don May is a group of crypto Jews that live inside of Turkey that they kind of hide amongst the population. And they were a big part of the Young Turks movement, that were a movement that was largely responsible for the Armenian genocide that killed a ton of Armenian Christians. And at the same time, they were fighting the Ottoman government, and they were fighting alongside the Allies. Were helping the Allies in the country achieve their goals, and they were kind of like the Syrian rebels. From what I've read, this is how it kind of went down. It was like, and they were helped by like the UK, France, the countries that were part of the Allies' campaign against the Ottoman Empire during World War I. Then after the country collapsed, they freed up Britain to take Palestine, and then they gave it to Israel in 1947. And you see, that's another supposed spontaneous movement, I guess you could say. But it was the Young Turks movement. But the Young Turks, there was and then you see it sounds familiar because Young Turks is the name the show that Senko Gore runs, which is takes some people that perspective. He's an alternative media host. He's an alternative media host like Alex Jones, and he's just the flip side of what Alex Jones supports over there. He gets some people by talking a little bit about the Patriot movement and acting like to be that he's actually running the Fed and that he's about taking on this government, but at the same time, he's in the Israelis' good side because he doesn't talk bad about Israel. And Senko Gore brings people, and then he just brings, and also Alex Jones, he gets people support as Zionist puppet Donald Trump. And I think Senko Gore is doing the same thing by getting people, he pretends like he's different, that he's actually against the system, but then he's in favor of Zionist puppet Hillary Clinton. It's sheepdogging potential activists in terms of people because they start tuning into alternative media, but it stops them right there. They're the gatekeepers. They have set up a buffer zone, I guess you could say, between the regular mainstream media and they put some of their guys in the alternative media. So when people start to venture into the alternative media, they get sheepdogged by these two. Senko Gore gets people that are coming in from MSNBC and some from CNN and maybe even some from Fox, and sheepdogs them right back in the system. And Alex Jones getting people from Fox, some from CNN, a little bit from MSNBC, and sheepdogs them right back into the system. And then it stops people from getting to the true alternative media. Again, like your Mint Press News, it's a good source, or even better, going into like the anti-media, and the best ones are like the shows, independent shows like ours, I guess, is little Jules that just talk about UCY and similar sources like that, and there's all across. I mean, there's the hardcore anti-Zionist side of the alternative media, which we not just acknowledge that Israel's bad and that they have done bad things against the Palestinians, but we acknowledge the malignity in the large scale of the Zionist conspiracy. That doesn't just stop at a few bad actions, or a few bad apples over there. It's a completely malign, heinous system, along with the United States government. That's a completely malign, heinous organization. Both were ultimately, in the end, controlled by most evil, malignant excuses of human beings on this planet in order for them eventually to do a new world order. And what's great about us? What's great about some of us over here in the alternative media? We don't have the FCC, so we can say whatever the fuck we want. Because I think sometimes it really just drives it home when you can really say what you want to say, and actually, and at the same time, see, that's people say that swearing and means you have bad vocabulary. I'm sorry that I can't use sesquipedalians, but at the same time, I can't indulge myself in some swearing to really drive the point home. But I could really exacerbate the situation for you by continuing to expose the invalidity of your argument, by continuing to use language of a higher lexicon, and show that your argument is at best flummoxing, that you continue your argument while I can continue to show you up. Of course, I have a lot more than that, but I'd like to try to keep our show at somewhat of a just natural. I don't try to, really make the show pop by using higher level, vocabulary like some people might try to. I just say whatever feels natural, comes to mind. But I'm looking at the I'm looking at the chat right now and seeing what's going on. And I don't know. It's also about racist lawnmowers. The chat always cracks me up sometimes when I see what's going on there. Yeah, the Ottomans didn't collapse in 1923. Somebody mentioned John Tudor, but the thing was that they were heavily damaged after the war, and the Young Turks took over or took a lot of influence before that. And what the Young Turks were not really the Ottoman Empire. They were the Jews inside the country that were partially the reason for their collapse. Not partially, but they were a major reason for the collapse. I'm looking as well, just trying to see what's. I'll see any questions more in the chat because I put a little bit. I noticed I try to put a little bit more. A little bit newer info that I really haven't even touched on. For example, like Don May and stuff. And somebody said that, and I think is that I've talked about quite a few times about the Zionist control over a lot of Christian America via Zionist proxy churches that are backed by Israel, like John Hagin, the Southern Baptist Church, and all these other churches that 100% back Israel, despite the fact that Israel almost matches when you talk about the Synagogue of Satan in Revelation. The Synagogue of Satan sounds like Israel. And Israel, you see how they treat Christians over there, is that they vandalize their churches and they treat Christians as second-class citizens. So it's pretty weird to see that, but there's a black church apparently that supports Israel. Now, that's pretty odd. Because also, that's a double oxymoron, a pro-Zionist black Christian, because Christians are treated as second-class citizens, and blacks are also treated as second-class citizens over there in Israel. The black women inside of Israel are sterilized. And also, the attitude towards black people inside of Israel is not very high. Just letting people know, because it's pretty much a country of Ashkenazi Jews that moved there more recently. A lot of them, for example, Netanyahu. I think his father's from Hungary, and his father's name is Miliowski. So you can see that's not a very Semitic-sounding name. So whenever you hear the argument that the criticism towards Israel is anti-Semitic, let's take the fact that the guy who always says that, Netanyahu, his father was not Semitic. He's not Semitic. He's pretty much just a white European convert to Judaism, also known as the Khazarians eventually, if you go back far enough. They converted around the year 800 when their country was either forced to be Muslim or Christian, and then they decided, and their country was pagan, the king decided that they'll convert to Judaism as a whole, and they'll be left alone after that. So, it happened. And now, so I almost feel, but I do feel a little bit odd saying, I guess, white, or just call them Ashkenazi, because white and Jew. A lot of times they'll even know. Sometimes they even flash back at you when you call them white. Jews a lot of times identify themselves, from Khazarian Jews, identify themselves as Jews rather than white, even though that they are pretty much just like. They're just, at one point, they were just other Europeans that converted, but at this point, they separate themselves. Their identities separate. Definitely, I think some of them, especially the ones that subscribe to the Zionist ideology, they really love to separate themselves from not just Europeans, but everybody on the planet. They like to say that they're superior to, or that the rest of the world's lower than them. and they call the rest of the world animals and stuff like that, or let's use the word goy, which means cattle. Again, it's inconvenient truth, but it is what it is, and you can ignore it all you want, but that's how it is at the end of the day. That Zionist Israel, America's beloved ally over there, does not like Americans back. What I mean by Americans, they don't like the Zionist people do not like the American people. It's not like, when I say that, for example, like in Venezuela, the Venezuelan people don't like America, it's more generally referring to the American government. Yes, a lot of them don't like American people either, but it's not all of them for sure. And it's not even, I wouldn't even say the overwhelming majority. Quite a few of them that realize it's not the American people's fault. We're so heavily brainwashed and so heavily conditioned from day one. I think when a lot of the world's starting to realize that, they used to blame us more. They used to say, yeah, the Americans should stand up. If they didn't believe that, they should stand up. They should stop being pussies about it. But now they're realizing that over the years that they are Americans, a lot of American people are very brainwashed, and they're put into a system that is very hard to even overcome, because it's like, even if they do know, a lot of Americans are working 80 hours a week in order to just survive. So when that happens, it's just bringing people to the point of total exhaustion. They're just like walking zombies. That's all they have the energy to do is just go to work and pay bills and fall asleep. That's all their lives have become. And more becoming like that, which is a sign. Like I said, as America goes from starts falling into lower statuses of a first world country, and then eventually becomes a third world country, like Pinochet's Chile, or it's a possibility. We might be a first world dictatorship, which for example, like for an example of a first world dictatorship, I guess you could say would be Franco Spain or something like that, or Salazar's Portugal. Some of the some of the European dictatorships were first world countries, but still the standard of living sucked because you couldn't do anything, because it was the government influence was everywhere. And that's two that come right to mind right there, right on the Mediterranean. I mean, they had a pretty nice. They were pretty developed countries, and they had pretty nice climates, but ultimately you had the secret police everywhere, and then there's a third world dictatorship like Chile was under Pinochet, and really he exacerbated the situation, and it went from a country that was maybe at the point where they could have been moved closer to a first world country if they would have just went along with Allende a few more years, but they went in the wrong way with Pinochet, and then it became a very poor third world country. Same, Venezuela was a very poor third world country in the 90s. A lot of South America, really what the 90s were for a lot of South America was just to be the end of the dryer cycle. It's been tossed around for the last 20 years, and it felt the effects of after 20, 30, sometimes even up to 50 years or so of fascism and Cold War politics that left them very, very poor and very, very broke, with very little to their names after the fascist dictatorships might have on paper fell at that point. Uruguay, it did. Brazil, it did. But now they were left in with kind of very weak neoliberal presidents. Caldera, people say Caldera, he was more, in a way, he kind of relaxed some of the policies of the Andrés Perez era, but I say he was just another piece of the Andrés Perez dictatorship. I don't think the Andrés Perez dictatorship literally did not fall until Chavez's election. Andrés Perez was still, because I think that if Chavez was not elected, even if Romero would have became the president, I think Andrés Perez would have still found a way to serve a term, or he would have been in the back, hovering around, because I think Romero would have definitely pardoned Andrés Perez, and I think that Andrés Perez would have been some kind of special advisor or something like him, or even if not even the president by the 2000s. He died in 2010 in Miami, and that's how long he was around. He was around. His reign of terror against it started in 1970, and he lived 40 years after that. But that's, again, like I said, some of the most wicked individuals live very long lives. Pinochet died in 2006. Probably something you didn't know. And then there's like Thatcher, that was how old, 87 years old or whatever, in 2014 when she died. 2013, I think. Was it 2013 or 20? I think it was 2014 when the person, and she was a big time working with Pinochet and the corrupt right-wing governments, the cocaine governments, I guess you could call them as well. There's a lot of them were behind it, especially like in the Central America. They were in with the cocaine trade. It was like there was the. It's like this is how it was divided up. South America, the black vans. You have your black van dictators, and you have the cocaine dictators as you go north, and then you have the quote unquote, I guess you could say, democratic dictator in Mexico, because they kept the illusion for many years of a democracy, and up to this day with Peña Nieto. But it feels like a complete dictatorship there. After Ayotzinapa, which I covered, remember I did the show on Ayotzinapa last year, talk about the 43 people that were 43 students that were kidnapped and killed by the Mexican government, and it showed the Mexican government and the Mexican cartel's collusion, and them being one in one organization. I just love when they act like, people were saying last June when El Chapo escaped for the first time. Was it the second time? Second time he escaped. When El Chapo escaped, people were saying how this could have happened. How it's because the Mexican government's so corrupt, and it didn't take him. They didn't really want to hold him. He was an ally. And the Mexican cartel is the boogeyman organization that keeps the Mexican government in good standing with the people, because the Mexican government has an enemy to fight. If that enemy didn't exist, the Mexican government would have had a revolution against it years ago, because the Mexican people are some fighting people. They had a revolution 100 years ago. Despite the United States interfering with it as much as they did, and being right there to have been able to interfere with it, it still was partially successful. And the Mexican government, the Mexican Revolution didn't have, at that time, all their potential allies were so far away, they didn't have any real allies. They had a little tiny support from Germany, but that was it. And it was pretty surprising with Emilio Zapata and these people that still have, like today, the Zapatistas still have a lot of supporters, street supporters inside of Mexico. And I think that with the right spark, the Zapatistas could come back in the action in Mexico. And I still predict that Peña Nieto will not serve till his election. I think that he'll be overthrown before 2018. May not in a completely violent way, but they did burn down one of the governor's houses in Mexico last year, I believe. So that was really where it spiked up, the revolutionary activity. But I think that it could spike up again. And they've had two elections that they had like a Chavez-like character ran in, and they were both robbed away from Obrador. And the last two elections was the PRD party. I think that Obrador will, with him being robbed the last two times, and if the election somehow does take place, I think that if it goes the wrong way, this will be the final straw, because that's the 2006 went that way, 2012 went that way. They'll pave the way for Peña Nieto to take power, and I think people are absolutely sick of them. And I think that the recent visit, Trump recently went down to visit Peña Nieto, and it showed that really what Trump's stance is. Trump's not going to argue with the Mexican elite that he can make a bunch of money with. He might not like poor Mexicans. He might not like poor Muslims. But he's definitely going to continue to do business with the rich Saudis, and he's definitely going to do business with the rich with the rich Mexicans such as Peña Nieto. Trump would love to get a nice Televisa contract, and he knows he's not going to. This is just a this show of an election. He knows he's not going to win it. His buddy Clinton's going to win it. But Trump would love to get a nice maybe reality TV contract or something of some sort. Maybe something with Televisa or whatever. A new venture. Maybe he can get some Spanish version of the Celebrity Apprentice going on, where he brings on Spanish-speaking businessmen. That could be something. But I don't want to give ideas to what could be Trump's next reality show. But that might have been something that was discussed at the meeting with Peña Nieto, because I don't think it was anything too legitimate, honestly. I don't think that Peña Nieto and Trump Trump and Peña Nieto were not discussing anything about immigration policy too much in depth, and we're not discussing them as actually Trump possibly being the president, because Trump knows he's not going to be the president. And looking at the looking back to the chat room, see what's going on. Still not too much right now, but no, I think that going back to, in Mexico, sorry I dropped off there, but I was saying is that the Mexican government is facing an actual rebellion, spontaneous rebellion, and this is also, Mexican people, I think, have a very revolutionary spirit about them, and that's what a spontaneous revolution, I think, looks like. There is not too much form backing of it at this point, and I think they're in the early stages of it, but I think they're getting close to a spontaneous revolutionary, and we're going to see some shit. We're going to be watching some serious fireworks from over here on the other side of the border when that goes down, because there's going to be, a lot more of, government officials' houses getting burned down and stuff like that. And it's going to be lovely to see, the absolutely corrupt Mexican government crumble, get kicked out of Mexico City, and some of them may get hanged from the square in Mexico City. If there's a square in Mexico City, they're getting hung from the square. Some of them. Like when Benito Mussolini was hung from the square inside of Italy after the war, and it was a message to dictators like that everywhere that you might think that you're invincible now, but just wait a few years, and when conditions are not so favorable for you. And wow, we're already at 10:13 Eastern time. And now we see a not so spontaneous protest. I'm going to talk about another one that's in the early stages and hopefully doesn't go much further. Zimbabwe. Apparently, there's been some protests there inside of Zimbabwe. And Zimbabwe is maybe the last real African government remains that hasn't been completely. A lot of Africa is ironically pro-Zionist. And a lot of Africa is controlled by neo-colonial dictators. A lot of Africa has been subverted. And same Libya, Islamic terrorists took over the country. And now that ISIS runs rampant in a lot of the areas. They have two different capitals because it's like two different criminal syndicates that are trying to control the same area. Tobruk and Tripoli. The General National Congress has they've been fighting for power. There's also like a Muslim Brotherhood, both two United States-backed governments. So whoever wins that toss-up, whoever's chosen to win that toss-up, because I think that with the United States involvement there, they're definitely going to pick who wins that, and I think that they're going to probably. I have a feeling the one in Tobruk right now they have most of the territory. They're controlling a lot of the country. I know Tripoli is controlled still by the General National Council, but they're both backed also by pro-U.S. regimes over there. For example, and also the United States backs both of the countries. And ISIS running around the country. They are beheading Christians. They are still running. They're still running wild. Now they're not as big of a problem there as, like, for example, Iraq and Syria, but they're a big problem. And in Sirte, Gaddafi's hometown is controlled by ISIS now. And Gaddafi, he was a huge fighter against terrorism in his country, and he kept those groups down for many years. And now, with the proposal of the strongman, it's led to an environment that is fertile for leaders like that. Leaders like that, people like that, to run wild in this country, in the country, because of the vacuum of power. Where it's almost been 5 years since Gaddafi was killed, and there still hasn't been a steady government that has taken place. I think that eventually the Gaddafi's loyalists will take power of the country. I mean, they're actually supposedly starting to come back in the country, and starting to take some positions inside the country. But it's weird also how in Zimbabwe that now we have this against Mugabe, who's a leader that has opposed foreign ownership of his the lands inside of Zimbabwe, and the British, the white minority inside of Zimbabwe only makes up 1% of the population, but yet they claim to be oppressed, partially on the fact that they feel that they're misrepresented in the parliament. They have one member and they have 1% of the population. That sounds about right. Man, what do they want? Do they want like 15% of the parliament, but yet they only have 1% of the population? And they control this party that's the main opposition to Mugabe inside of Zimbabwe. It's like the Movement for Democracy or something like that. And now these protests started up, and I was talking actually a little bit with a Zimbabwean in person over here in St. Pete, and she was talking about we were talking a little bit. I asked her some of the questions about how whites treated there, and she said they're actually treated normally with respect, and that foreign black people are treated just like their own citizens. So it's definitely a Pan-African society, I would say. And she was talking about how Mugabe, or how the country got up to in 2001 as the richest country in Africa, or second richest country in Africa, and then now it's been through some serious economic problems because we talk about the inflation. And it's like, yeah, it's what happens. The economic warfare causes the inflation of a country to skyrocket through the roof, and the value of the Zimbabwean dollar was so low that eventually, it went to where it cost us 300 billion Zimbabwean dollars to buy some eggs. So I guess Danny DeVito would be out of luck there. Trying to do the math on that one. It would be so led to, with the impracticality of still using the Zimbabwean dollar. It led to them going to a new currency, which now they're using the Chinese money, which is maybe not the most beneficial for their country. And I would hope maybe they go to the ruble or something like that, or maybe even go into going to some kind of gold or something like that, just going back to trading gold. But I know it's kind of unrealistic, and nowadays there has to be every country has to have some kind of currency. But Zimbabwe, why can't they be? They've been different on a few things. Why can't they be different on this? The protests started recently, and it reminiscent of the Brazil, Libya events. And the Libya, that's what really scares me. The Libya events is that they start off with just protests as well, and all of a sudden these Islamists started picking up guns and were fighting a full-scale war inside their country. And these absolutely barbaric characters came out of the woodwork that were in Libya. And these militants, now this country's a complete free-for-all. There's all kinds of militias. There's all the Gaddafi loyalists. There's ISIS. There's all these different Islamists. There's the government, which are just pretty much other Islamists inside of Libya, all running around inside of Libya. And it all started with a few protests that seemed to came out of nowhere with that whole Arab Spring. Remember how we heard a bunch of it about 5 years ago, all about Arab Spring and all this spontaneous protest there. Supposedly Facebook started it or whatnot, and that governments were being toppled because of Facebook. You're going to tell me that they organized all that via Facebook? Gaddafi was a huge critic of Israel and a huge critic of the United States. Though he was here, he was here just in 2009, and he was known for when he came to the White House, he put a teepee, or not teepee, a teepee-like structure, like their native. Like a native tent or something like that, and he would not sleep in the White House bed. And Gaddafi, I think it was when he came here in the '80s. He did that. I remember in the '80s, right after he came here, I think they got bombed in '85 by the United States, as they called by the crazy cowboy Reagan. The speeches were loud and vociferous, that's for sure. He did not hold back when he was talking about Western leaders and was talking about the Zionists or whatnot. And he pretty much accused the Zionists of having a big part of killing JFK. And Gaddafi also did a major thing for his country and removed the Rothschilds' influence over their currency. He was able to, he was working on the African Union, which would have united all of Africa, and eventually an African currency, the gold dinar for all of Africa, gold-backed currency, Rothschild free for all of Africa, finally freeing Africa of hundreds and hundreds of years of colonialism. And definitely, I would say, and then before the Europeans were around, there was not the greatest of places either. And I think that honestly, there was a bad history before that, and I think about, for example, back in ancient Egypt and some of the other stuff that happened in ancient Africa, but ending hundreds of years. We're talking about 500 years or so of European colonialism and foreign involvement with the African continent. We're about to end with Gaddafi. We could have, by this point, the African Union could have been a functioning organization, and the currency could have already been being handed out. But the only big roadblock to that was time, and they took out Gaddafi before he had enough time to put in the African Union. And not only did they took him out, they killed him brutally. And the video, a lot of people have seen Gaddafi getting brutally murdered. An absolutely horrible sight, and it showed the lack of humanity that these Libyan rebels had. The Libyan people, a lot of them were still in favor of the Gaddafi government, and even late into the revolution, were still coming out in thousands and thousands, tens of thousands of people to support Gaddafi. and Gaddafi was still going real late, going into September 2011. Was still trying. October 2011, he fought all the way to his death. I think he was still thinking of finding his way back to Tripoli so he could run the country again. And not be, I don't think he wanted, not just run the country, but run the country no longer in hiding. He ran back to Sirte, where he was born, and he was killed outside of Sirte by Libyan rebels. He was chased down by his truck left with him in it, and they were chased down by the rebels, where he was later then tortured by the rebels and killed. He was he could have left the country like some of his sons did, and he could have fled the country and been safe, but it shows his character that he stayed in this country and went back to his hometown, and he wanted to fight to stay in power. If he was just another leader, another politician that was just thinking about himself, he could have ran back to he could have ran into Oman like his son did, or any country that would take him. I'm sure that, for example, I think that there were a few countries that would have taken him if he would have went to it. But he stayed and fought. Egypt as well that same year had a spontaneous protest. Now, it was taking out another shithead who was Mubarak. Mubarak was the leader of Egypt for about the last 30 years prior to that. And he was a pro-U.S., pro-Saudi, pro-Israeli dictator that would crack down on his people heavily. And it was but then, the thing is that all of a sudden this protest happens, and then he's overthrown not long later, and then we have this character that comes out of an organization that's also backed by the United States, the Muslim Brotherhood. Mohammed Morsi takes power. And what does he do? Is that ultimately he just, some people credit him with improving the relations between Egypt and Palestine, but Mohammed Morsi, he just became a broker between and a broker that sided and favored, I think, with he just pretty much became a middleman between Israel and Palestine to talk. But Mohammed Morsi backed the Zionist-backed death squads inside of Syria that were going against Assad, which is probably in all reality Assad and Iran. That's Israel's two biggest enemies right now in the region. And Muslim Brotherhood they've caused trouble before against Assad. They were behind the Hama uprising against Assad's father, which Assad's father also has a similar stance as Bashar al-Assad does. Bashar al-Assad has been a strong supporter of the Palestinian state, a strong opponent of Zionism for many years. And the Assad government today has been on at least since 2006, has been on the United States hit list. And the United States has been thinking of invading for years. They try to make it seem like it's for humanitarian reasons that is the reason why the United States would justify a invasion. That's what they're trying to credit it to, that they're trying to protect the people from the brutal, evil Assad regime. People don't even realize that the Assad regime, it was a secular state. It was a country that he protected the minorities inside of Syria prior to the Civil War, and he still does. The Kurdish Christians, and the majority Sunni that he supposedly oppresses, 90% of his military is Sunni. And the Assad regime continues to be the major fighter against ISIS, but they try to almost have you believing over here in the United States that Assad is somehow backs ISIS. Then some of the Syrian rebel fanboys go into these crazy ideas that they said that they back pretty much every organization inside of Syria that's Islamist to bring down the legitimate moderate Syrian rebels that don't even exist. You know, I see these people sometimes saying that how they back the Syrian revolution, and they back the left wing, pro-gay, pro-black, pro-minority Syrian rebels that do not exist. Period. There's not even moderate Syrian rebels. There's no moderate Syrian rebels. All these Syrian rebels are head choppers backed by Israel and the United States to take out Assad and then turn it into a proxy state like Saudi Arabia and Syria after Assad would be a very, very bad place to live. The Syria has been kept together for the last 46 years because of the Assad keeping all the different ethnic groups in the country, similar to like Al Qaeda kept the different ethnic groups from fighting each other inside of Yugoslavia. Assad has done that in Syria. Assad goes, bad news in Syria. And really just bad news across the Middle East. Because ISIS will then spread everywhere, I think, if Syria was to go. I mean, Iran might be able to contain it, but they without their major fighting partner, Syria, ISIS would be very hard to contain. It would be very hard to, the flames would just go everywhere. The flames of the United States Israeli beast that is ISIS. ISIS, it's kind of weird because every time I watch now that, there's that TV show Archer, that the protagonist organization is supposed to be a United States intelligence agency, similar to the CIA, but it's like partially private as well. And that's where the kingpin of the organization, Mallory Archer, is able to make some money off of their espionage activities. But ISIS is the organization, and I don't know what now I can't think of what I think it's something like International Secret Intelligence Services is the organization or something like that, which is just changed. The Israeli Secret Intelligence Services is actually a name that's a lot of times used for Mossad. So, and also a lot of people say that that Shaman Elliott that's who al-Baghdadi actually is. And there is no real person al-Baghdadi. And that's why a lot of the organizations actually Israeli Americans, people from Western Europe and other countries. And there's a lot of them that have no connections to the Arab countries or the Middle East in general. And I don't think it's too shocking. It's like I said, it's an absolute clandestine, secretive creeps that are the Mossad. They get involved everywhere. And I think that it'll be a long time before Israel and the United States admits it in their role. Going back, it goes back to Mujahideen, the first ones during the Carter administration that the United States backed, U.S.-backed terrorists against the then current government of Afghanistan. It's a long-time policy, and it's just going to keep continuing and keep continuing. Just now, we need to speak up about it, and to speak up about really all the issues that we talk about on UCY radio and shows like mine. and get the information out. I'm just going to go back to the chat room. I'm going to check the chat room a couple times, see if any got any questions, concerns, or whatnot going on there. 10:34. It's not too late to share the show with your friends. You got friends on Facebook or whatnot. Tell them to come in, tune in live while I'm still live, and also later on when this show becomes archived on YouTube, tell them to check it out on YouTube. All shows get saved, so if you missed part of the show, you're just tuning in now, tuned in a little, or you missed part of the show, tuned in earlier, and just tuning back in now. And when tuning back in now, check out the YouTube video later, and see the entire 2-hour show. You can see the entire 2-hour show later. And it's like 30 minutes later it actually uploads. And looking at the what's going on here in the chat room. Not too much. Sometimes, I use some of the stuff in the chat room. Put a little note. Somebody brings up a good fact or whatever. I'll just say what was, sometimes I'll say, I'm just quoting the chat room here, but this is what's going on here. And, this is it. It's an interesting thing. And I haven't mentioned it too much, but, the Chinese have some connections to some odd figures, and here's like an example of one, is that when he was dedicated on Chinese post stamps, is that Israel Epstein was a Bolshevik, he was the Bolshevik advisor, Chairman Mao, great admirer of the Bolshevik Revolution, and he was not, as the name sounds, he was not Chinese whatsoever, and he was but yet he was he was one of the people. There was like 3 or 4 of these I can think of off the top of my head that were in the Chinese Communist Party, but actually I can't think of the name, so I guess I can't really think of off the top of my head, but they were in the Chinese Communist Party, high-level positions sometimes, but were from the West and were or like European Jews like that, or from the United States. So when they're European or United States, but they try to act like they were something that was to benefit the Chinese people, the Chinese movement, the Chinese Communist Revolution. I just find that to be a little bit of an interesting fact. Also, what comes to mind when you think of the supposed spontaneous protests that were really, formed back. Think about the protests that happened in Brazil that led to Temer's resignation, but her impeachment. Now that Rousseff has actually been impeached, did I say Temer? I meant Rousseff. Rousseff's impeachment has led to Temer now being the president of Brazil. Is that just think of the Rousseff impeachment and think that she was a leader that was elected with a pretty good size of the vote just in 2015, and then in 2016 all of a sudden the spontaneous calls for her impeachment, and they made up this just like seems to be a general blanket charge of corruption. There's not really too much to there's no specifics really given. There's not too much more than just that they said that she played with the budget and that she took like a $2.4 million for herself or something like that is what they accused her of. Even though that this was what I see is clearly a coup, a parliamentary coup, and at first I thought that this was. I refrained from using the word parliamentary coup, but this is a parliamentary coup. Just when Lugo was impeached by a parliamentary coup when he was sick and with cancer, Rousseff has been removed by a parliamentary coup. So now that's 2 leaders that have been removed by parliamentary coups in recent years. That was 2012 when Lugo was removed by a parliamentary coup. Brazil had a parliamentary coup just take place, and now the government that's taken place is a pro-U.S., pro-Zionist-backed government, similar to like Marcio Macri. And Marcio Macri and Pablo Kaczynski, Marcio Macri of Argentina and Pablo Kaczynski of Peru, got the power now recently via elections. Christina Kirchner did not run in the 2015 Argentine election, and there was a person that was supported by her party, but not her, and he didn't quite get the popular support that was needed, and may possibly some electoral tampering by the other side, and Marcio Macri won, and Pablo Kaczynski won by an election that was a fraud because there was no true opponent. It was just that or the daughter of former dictator Keiko Fujimori. Keiko Fujimori is the daughter of Alberto Fujimori that had many Native American or Native Peruvian, Native Amerindian women sterilized inside of that country. Native Amerindian women were sterilized inside that country, and he cracked down heavily inside of his country, and he led the country all the way up to 2000. So, let's talk about that. The 90s, the South American dictatorships had already fallen. Well, not necessarily. Alberto Fujimori was still there. And he led a reign of terror, maybe not quite to the extent of Augustus Pinochet or Alfredo Stroessner. And Alfredo Stroessner led a reign of terror for so long, 35 years. He controlled Paraguay, and he controlled it from 1954 to 1989. And his same party that he was a part of is now back in power with Horacio Cortez after the parliamentary coup that took out Fernando Lugo in 2012. And Horacio Cortez has been the president since 2012. Now, he might come back to power Lugo might come back to power in 2018, and Rousseff can't come back to power in the next election in Brazil, which is in 2018. That means that Temer can do some serious damage in the next 2 years while he is the president, because before he will face an election, which he'll lose because he's very unpopular unless there's some serious tampering. Temer will face most likely Lula, who I think he'll get crushed by unless there's just some tampering. I think Lula could get over 60% of the vote because Lula was a very popular president, and he got sick with cancer, and Rousseff took power, and Rousseff wasn't quite as popular. Rousseff was similar to like a Maduro character inside of Brazil, but I think she was more popular than Maduro inside of Brazil. Maduro has maybe like 40% of the support of Venezuelan people. I think Rousseff had like around 60% of the support of the Brazilian people. And somehow she gets impeached, and it all happens to be the parliament. The parliament does it. The parliament, away from everybody, and this is backed by foreign powers, the parliament did an impeachment against Rousseff and brings about Michael Temer that's already been caught in a scandal just a couple months into his presidency. He was acting president since May, since the impeachment started. Rousseff was suspended as president in May of this year, and she was officially removed from the presidency just this week. And yeah, it's crazy. I think that this week we had the president of Brazil impeached, and we also had another president died of Uzbekistan, which, yeah, don't blame yourself if you haven't heard of the country. The former Soviet Republic, Islam Karimov, who was the president of Uzbekistan. Islam Karimov died after 27 years of being the president of the country, and it was pretty sudden, I guess. I mean, but not really. His health is deteriorating, but he had a stroke on Sunday, and he died Friday, and he's kind of like he was at one point he was called an American ally in the war on terror. He faced an assassination attempt in 1999 by Islamists, and he led a pretty strict country. From what I saw, I didn't even know anything really about him until Friday when I read that he died. But I think that I think that's going to leave a pretty open power vacuum, and just hopefully that country doesn't become another example of when a power vacuum happens, like with Libya, where now all these different groups run wildly trying to take power of the country. I don't think it's similar. Gaddafi was a great individual, a great leader that led that country for so long. He led it for 42 years. And then not only was there the power vacuum that people didn't really know what to do with, is that there was all these groups. There was nobody that could even come close to the kind of leadership abilities Gaddafi had. That from a very young age he was able to lead that country to be very prosperous, and it became Africa's richest country. It became a very big tourist spot. It also, at the same time, brought water to places that never had water. I mean, these huge projects that the Libyan government undertook with Gaddafi's power, and Gaddafi made it happen. And I was saying, Gaddafi was a leader that can make things happen. And after Gaddafi was gone, the country is now in disarray. And I think that it's also be a similar situation as Zimbabwe. If Mugabe was to go, I don't think they're really questioning Mugabe going. Because I think Mugabe's going one way or another soon. I don't think he's going to be the president too much longer. He is 90-something years old, and 92 years old. And, he said he's going to run again at 94 years old for re-election, which, no, he hasn't been the president for like 60 years, if that's what you're thinking. He's been the president since the 80s. And he's enjoyed quite a bit of support. He's a very popular leader there. He's a pretty popular leader across Africa. And around the world, he enjoys quite a bit of support. He really shuts down, sometimes reporters come there from the UK or whatever to try to lambaste him and try to berate him on supposed human rights violations and such. And, he always just shuts down these propaganda and these lies that are brought about by these different countries about him. It's always entertaining to watch. It kind of reminds me of when Larry King tried to take on Ahmadinejad, and Ahmadinejad absolutely creamed him by just showing the complete fallacies and holes in his argument. Ahmadinejad was the greatest president of Iran. I hope he wins in 2017. I mean, apparently he's running in 2017, which is only just a few months away, the election. And Rouhani's been kind of a character that's been trying to open up the relations to the West. I think that's somewhat. I think that the stuff like the Iranian peace agreement, stuff like that, is just a trap for Iran. Iran needs to realize that these are just things to entice the Iranians into a sense of false security, and then later they go and bomb it. Like I said, I think that the United States is going to get much more aggressive on foreign policy, and is going to bomb some third world countries. And I think Iran is going to be one of them during the Hillary Clinton administration. And I think Venezuela should watch out as well, because they might bomb them as well. I think that when it comes to percentages, I think that Venezuela is much lower. I think it's only about a 5% chance that they actually bomb the country. I think that Iran is 99.9%. I would be pretty shocked to see Iran not get bombed under a Hillary Clinton administration, especially after how we saw her act. After I saw her act in the 2000s about the bombing Iran, and it seems to be her. This is the plan for her to do it. For Hillary Clinton, which Hillary Clinton, to an extent, is sort of like a Reagan character when it comes to, she's old, crotchety, and doesn't really give a shit what happens in the other across the world. Reagan led to a lot of suffering over in Eastern Europe and the Middle East, and Hillary Clinton is going to lead possibly to Eastern Europe and the Middle East. And they're both about the same age, and both figures that are somewhat feared around the world. But I think both. But at the same time, both of them are laughed at, but are feared. Then laughed at, but are feared. It is right now. We're nearing the end of the show. Hillary Clinton. It's just, of course, will just be a corporate spokesman of America. But it's the fact that Hillary Clinton is it's the fact of what she represents. This is what America is going to, and America going to her shows that they're definitely going on full war hawk, full imperialist mode for the next 8 years, if not longer. Who's to say that Hillary Clinton, this was not, with martial law coming up, will even have elections, even for show? Because they're just show elections. They're not real elections. But who's to say that they might even have the show election in 2020 or 2024, especially if we're in a big state of war at that point, or there's a state of emergency inside the country in 2020 or in 2024. All these people are talking about what how optimistic they are. All these young people that were on the Bernie Sanders revolution, how optimistic they are for 2020 and 2024 to totally change Washington, D.C., which they don't even understand any bit about how Washington, D.C. works. Now it's completely bought out by the Zionists and the elite. But they don't realize that there might not even be elections at that point, and that they don't realize it will be martial law, and it's going to be a major war with Iran by that point. I'm very, very, very sure that Syria and Iran, there will be a major war with the United States against them by 2020. And, with just the indications by Dick Cheney and Benjamin Netanyahu that these countries will be attacked, because they indicated that there'll be the false flag that will justify the attack. Americans might not accept at this point war with Syria and Iran. In fact, only 9% supported the strikes on Syria in 2013, but after a false flag happened, thoughts changed. It's like what David Rockefeller once said, is that people won't accept all these horrible things now, but if there's a threat that they can't understand, something that really scares them, something big that really scares them, maybe they'll accept all these things. And that's not even close to the quote at all, because it's not even really a register what I was about to say, but you can look up the quote about David Rockefeller talking about. That was back in 1991. He was talking about. And it's a Payday Monsanto song. Payday Monsanto. Check them out, by the way. I think he just released a new album, and he's I don't agree with everything he says, but he's definitely my dog. Payday Monsanto is a great. He's a great rapper, underground rapper, like Low Key or Immortal Technique, which Immortal Technique I use for my intro songs in my outro. By the way, if you didn't know what those songs were, that outro song is Point of No Return. My intro song is Rich Man's World. I used to use Payday Monsanto here at UCY only until until we were allowed by Immortal Technique to actually use Immortal Technique's music, and that's before that we used Payday Monsanto, and Payday Monsanto had on there 2 songs. Payday Monsanto, just definitely go check them out when you get a chance. We have to really next week. This is another talk about we need to do some stuff. We need to really, talk about it, because we're going to see we're going to get blasted next few days with all the propaganda about how our country's under threat and how our country, the boogeyman, the terrorists are out to get the United States, and that's why we need to give up our freedoms, and that's why we need to pretty much accept martial law. But we should tell our families and friends that about the 9/11 false flag. Talk about the dancing Israelis. The dancing Israelis, the mural van, urban movement systems, the 60 Israelis detained on 9/11, Dick Cheney telling NORAD to stand down, the World Trade Center 7 falling down like a controlled demolition, the World Trade Centers falling after just 2 hours of being on fire, but no buildings ever collapsed like that in history, or that they fell on each other like a pancake. Like World Trade Center, both the World Trade Centers just fell down and fell to to its own footprint, like a pancake, and that they fell at nearly free fall speed. Let's talk about that. Let's talk about how not just internet conspiracy theorists talk about the 9/11 inside job, but archaeologists. Did I say architects? Architects. Damn, that was a bad slip right there. Architects, engineers, pilots, scientists, physicists. The physicists is the main one that they can explain how that is impossible for that what we saw, that flattening of that building during 9/11 to have happened. 9/11. Talk about 9/11. The inside job is a major responsibility for all the listeners the next week, and I implore you to the best of your ability, try to at least try to convince 2 of your family members / friends in the next week, and tell them to look it up. Go to 911truths.org. Just start them off with the simple stuff. All those architects, engineers for 9/11 Truths. All those basic sites. Just have them check it out. To also talk. The explosions coming from the floors below, when that indicated that explosions were used. We'll talk about the thermite that was at the site of the Twin Towers, and talk about it. Yeah, it was like magma that was there for months sitting there. Talk about that. Talk about the. Don't go into the crazy stuff. I mean, there's the parts of the 9/11 Truth movement that are just to discredit us, like the holograms and all that. I mean, there might be some truth to some of that stuff, but it's definitely nothing to start off with. You start off with the basic stuff and the physics. You talk about the thermite and all the stuff that are the big indicators of the inside job. That's the things you focus on. And we're nearing the end of the show already. We're in the last 2 minutes here, and also, and show them the alarming stuff. Once they got them on the basic stuff, the most basic stuff, go into a little bit the lesser basic stuff, which is the dancing Israelis and the Mossad bands. And it's documented with recordings of 911 calls and stuff about the Mossad bands. There's all kinds of the 60 Israelis that were arrested and they were let go just a few months later, probably after they're debriefed and everything. Debriefed, or they were given their next mission dossier and debriefed, and then they were let go. They got their next steps in their mission, and they were let go. And thanks everyone for tuning in to Voice of Rebellion Radio. Yep, keep on 9/11 Truth. That's the main thing this week. Don't try to do what I almost catch myself doing, is that you're in a professional setting or whatever, and somebody brings up a little something slightly political, and you take that little inch and you go a mile with it. and then you start sounding crazy because you go on some rant about how
Point and no return, and nobody can stop it. Malcolm Little when he knelt before Elijah Muhammad, the comet that killed the dinosaurs, changing the earth. They love to criticize, they always say I changed for the worse. Like prescription pills when you misusing them, nigga. The Templar Knights when they took Jerusalem, nigga, and figured out what was buried under Solomon's temple. Al-Aqsa, the name is not coincidental. I know too much, the government is trying to murder me. No coming back like cutting your wrists open vertically. How could the serpent be purposely put in charge of the country? Genetic engineered sickness spread amongst me. My people are so hungry that they attack without reason, like a fucking dog ripping off the hand that feeds them. Immortal technique is treason to the Patriot Act. So come and get me, motherfucker, cause I'm not coming back. This is the point from which I can never return, and if I back down now, then